Captain James Fletcher had served the Royal Guard for 22 years. His uniform was always perfect, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his loyalty never questioned. Until today. The morning of Queen Camilla's coronation dawned gray and cold over London. Westminster Abbey buzzed with activity as hundreds of workers put finishing touches on decorations. Golden banners hung from ancient stone columns, and red carpets stretched across floors that had witnessed centuries of royal ceremonies. James stood at his assigned post near the altar, watching dignitaries file into their seats. His trained eyes scanned the crowd for threats, but his mind wrestled with something far more dangerous than any assassin. For months, he had been discovering things about the royal family that made his stomach turn. Secret meetings, hidden documents, and whispered conversations had revealed truths that shattered his lifelong devotion to the crown. The first crack in his faith came 6 months ago. James had been assigned to guard a private meeting between palace officials and foreign diplomats. He wasn't supposed to hear the conversation, but the door was slightly open. They discussed selling access to state secrets, using royal influence for personal gain, and covering up scandals that would destroy public trust. Camilla's voice was clear among them, directing the corruption with cold calculation. More evidence followed. James discovered bank records showing millions of pounds flowing from questionable sources into royal accounts. He found communication logs proving that sensitive government information was being traded for luxury gifts and favors. Most shocking of all, he uncovered a plan to use the coronation ceremony itself as a platform to announce policies that would benefit Camilla's personal business interests while harming ordinary British citizens. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on James like a stone. His father had been a royal guard before him, and his grandfather before that. The Fletcher family had served the crown for 3 generations, believing they protected something sacred and honorable. Now James felt like he had been guarding criminals. Sleep became impossible. Food lost its taste. His wife Sarah noticed his distress, but he couldn't tell her why. How could he explain that everything they had believed about the royal family was a lie? How could he admit that his life's work had been protecting people who betrayed the very nation they claimed to serve? 3 weeks before the coronation, James made a decision that would change everything. He began making copies of the evidence he had gathered. Bank statements, recorded conversations, meeting notes, photographs of secret documents. He collected it all. His plan was simple but terrifying. Expose the truth during the coronation ceremony when the whole world would be watching. The night before the coronation, James sat in his small London flat, staring at a manila envelope filled with documents that could topple the monarchy. His hands shook as he held papers that proved years of corruption and betrayal. Sarah slept in the next room, unaware that her husband was about to become either a hero or a traitor. James thought about his oath to protect and serve. But who should he serve? Corrupt royals or the British people who trusted them? His duty was clear, even if it meant destroying his career and possibly his life. He carefully placed the most damaging documents in his inner jacket pocket, where they would be safe until the moment came to reveal them. The rest he sealed in envelopes addressed to major newspapers, television stations, and government officials. If something happened to him during the ceremony, the truth would still come out. Morning arrived with surprising sunshine, as if nature itself was celebrating what would become the most shocking day in modern royal history. James put on his dress uniform one last time, knowing it would be the last day he ever wore it. Each button, each medal, each symbol of his service felt heavier than usual. At the Abbey, security was tighter than James had ever seen. Hundreds of guards surrounded the building, checking every person, every package, every possible threat. But they weren't looking for the real danger, a loyal guardsman with a broken heart and a pocket full of truth. The ceremony began with traditional pomp and grandeur. Trumpets announced the arrival of royal family members as they processed down the aisle in their formal robes and glittering jewelry. The Archbishop of Canterbury took his position at the altar, holding the ancient crown that would soon rest on Camilla's head. James watched it all from his position near the front of the abbey. His heart pounded so hard he wondered if other guards could hear it. Sweat dripped down his back despite the cool morning air. In just minutes, he would either save his country or destroy himself, trying. Television cameras captured every moment for the millions of people watching around the world. James thought about all those families gathered around their televisions, believing they were witnessing a sacred ceremony. They had no idea they were about to see the monarchy's darkest secrets exposed in the most public way possible. Camilla entered the abbey to thunderous organ music, walking slowly down the aisle in a flowing golden gown covered in diamonds and emeralds. She smiled and waved to the crowd, playing her role perfectly. But James saw something else in her expression. A cold satisfaction, as if she was already planning how to use her new power for personal gain. The Archbishop began the ancient coronation ritual, speaking words that had been repeated for centuries. Each phrase brought the ceremony closer to its climax, and brought James closer to the moment that would change history. As Camilla knelt before the altar to receive the crown, James felt his training take over. Every muscle in his body tensed, ready for action. His hand moved toward his inner pocket where the evidence waited. He had spent 22 years protecting the crown. Now he was about to destroy it. The Archbishop raised the St. Edward's crown high above Camilla's head, pausing in the moment of sacred tradition. 2,000 guests held their breath. Television cameras zoomed in for the historic moment. This was when James Fletcher stepped forward. "Stop!" His voice cut through the abbey like a sword through silk. The Archbishop froze, the crown still suspended in his hands. Camilla's eyes snapped up, confusion and anger flashing across her face. A collective gasp echoed through the ancient building as heads turned toward the uniformed guard who had just shattered centuries of royal protocol. James stepped into the center aisle, his boots clicking loudly on the stone floor. Security guards immediately moved toward him, but something in his bearing made them hesitate. This wasn't a madman or terrorist. This was one of their own, a respected captain whose service record was spotless. "Your Majesty," James said, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence, "I cannot allow this ceremony to continue. I have evidence that proves Camilla Parker Bowles is unfit to wear the crown of England." The abbey erupted in chaos. Guests began talking loudly, some standing to get a better view. Palace security guards received frantic signals through their earpieces. Television directors scrambled to decide whether to cut the feed or capture this unprecedented moment for history. King Charles rose from his throne, his face pale with shock and growing fury. "Captain Fletcher, you will step down immediately. This is treason." But James had passed the point of no return. He pulled the manila envelope from his jacket and held it high for everyone to see. "These documents prove that your wife has been selling state secrets, accepting bribes, and planning to use royal power for personal profit. The British people deserve to know who they're really crowning today." Camilla finally found her voice. "This is outrageous. Security, arrest this man immediately." "I am security," James replied calmly, "and my oath is to protect Britain, not to protect criminals who wear crowns." The Archbishop, still holding the crown, looked desperately between the royal family and the guard. Never in his long career had he faced such a situation. Ancient protocol had no guidance for what to do when the coronation itself was challenged from within. James began reading from the documents. His voice was steady and professional, as if he was giving a standard security briefing instead of destroying the monarchy on live television. Bank records show that Lady Camilla received £3 million from Russian oligarchs in exchange for access to classified defense information. Phone recordings prove she promised to influence government policy on oil drilling rights in exchange for personal investments in offshore companies. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Some guests looked scandalized, others skeptical. The international dignitaries present began whispering urgently to their aides, realizing they were witnessing either a historic exposure of corruption or an elaborate act of treason. James continued reading, his voice growing stronger with each revelation. Meeting notes from secret gatherings show plans to dissolve Parliament's oversight powers and establish direct royal control over government contracts worth billions of pounds. She has been preparing to turn the British monarchy into a profit-making enterprise for her personal benefit. King Charles stepped down from his throne, his face red with rage. "Stop this nonsense immediately. Guards, remove this man." But something strange was happening among the security team. Instead of immediately rushing forward, many guards stood frozen, uncertainty clear on their faces. James Fletcher was not just any guard. He was their captain, a man they respected and trusted. His accusations were so specific, so detailed, that doubt began creeping into their minds. James noticed their hesitation and pressed his advantage. "I call upon the Archbishop to suspend this coronation until these charges can be investigated. I call upon Parliament to examine this evidence before allowing any new monarch to be crowned. And I call upon the British people to demand the truth about who really serves them." The media chaos was unprecedented. Camera operators ignored shouted orders to stop filming. This was the biggest story of their careers, and professional instincts overrode royal protocol. Around the world, people sat glued to their televisions, watching the British monarchy tear itself apart in real time. Camilla stood up from where she had been kneeling, her ceremonial robes rustling. Her mask of royal dignity had completely slipped, revealing a fury that made her unrecognizable from the smiling woman who had entered the abbey. "You have destroyed yourself, Captain Fletcher," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "When this is over, you will lose everything. Your career, your reputation, your freedom. I will make sure of it." James looked directly into her eyes and saw everything he needed to confirm his decision was right. There was no denial in her face, no shock at false accusations, only rage at being exposed. "Your threats prove my point, Your Majesty," he replied. "A true queen would demand investigation to clear her name. A guilty person threatens those who speak truth." The standoff stretched on as palace officials frantically made phone calls and security teams received conflicting orders. The Archbishop still held the crown, unsure whether to proceed or retreat. The ancient ceremony had become a modern courtroom, with the world watching the trial of a would-be queen. Television commentators around the globe struggled to explain what they were witnessing. Constitutional experts were pulled from universities to analyze whether the coronation could legally continue. Social media exploded with debates, theories, and reactions from ordinary people who had never expected to see royal power challenged so directly. Inside the abbey, the 2,000-person audience had become unwitting witnesses to history. Dukes and duchesses sat next to foreign ambassadors, all equally stunned by the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. Some began quietly leaving their seats, unsure whether the ceremony would continue or if they were about to witness arrests. James felt a strange calm settle over him as he waited for whatever would happen next. The hardest part was over. He had spoken the truth, shared the evidence, and challenged corruption at the highest levels of power. Whatever consequences followed, he had kept his real oath to protect the British people from those who would betray them. The moment stretched on, heavy with tension and possibility. The crown still hung suspended above Camilla's head, waiting for a decision that would determine whether truth or tradition would triumph in Westminster Abbey. The silence in Westminster Abbey was finally broken by the Archbishop's trembling voice. "I believe this ceremony must be suspended pending investigation of these serious allegations." King Charles lunged forward as if to grab the crown himself, but palace advisors quickly surrounded him, whispering urgent warnings. The legal and constitutional crisis unfolding live on television could destroy the monarchy entirely if handled wrong. James Fletcher was arrested within minutes, but not before handing copies of his evidence to 3 different journalists in the crowd. As handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he felt lighter than he had in months. The truth was out, and no one could put it back in the box. The next 72 hours changed Britain forever. Major newspapers ran emergency editions with headlines screaming, "Corruption Crown" and "Royal Scandal Rocks Nation." Television news programs ran continuous coverage as experts analyzed the documents James had revealed. Social media exploded with debates about the monarchy's future. James sat in a holding cell, watching the chaos unfold on a small television. His wife Sarah visited on the second day, her eyes red from crying but her voice strong with pride. "The whole country is talking about you," she said through the security glass. "Half think you're a hero, half think you're a traitor." "What do you think?" James asked. Sarah smiled for the first time since his arrest. "I think you're the man I married, the one who always does what's right, even when it's hard." Meanwhile, Parliament called an emergency session. Opposition leaders demanded a full investigation into the documents James had provided. Government lawyers worked frantically to verify the evidence, while palace officials insisted everything was forged. But the evidence was too detailed, too specific, to be fake. Bank investigators confirmed the suspicious money transfers. Phone company records verified the existence of the recorded conversations. Handwriting experts authenticated the meeting notes. Within a week, 3 separate investigations were launched, one by Parliament, one by Scotland Yard, and one by the Bank of England's Financial Crimes Division. The evidence James had gathered proved to be just the beginning. Once investigators started looking, they found years of corruption, secret deals, and abuse of royal power. Camilla's lawyers fought desperately to suppress the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally, but public pressure was too intense. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace with signs reading, "Investigate the Crown," and "Fletcher is a hero." The most damaging revelation came when investigators found Camilla's personal phone records. Text messages showed her coordinating with foreign business partners to use royal influence for profit. Voice recordings revealed her laughing about stupid British taxpayers who funded her luxury lifestyle while she sold their country's secrets. King Charles faced an impossible choice: stand by his wife and risk losing his crown, or sacrifice her to save the monarchy. The decision was made for him when audio emerged of Camilla mocking his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, calling her that boring old woman who never understood how to really use power. 3 weeks after the failed coronation, Camilla was stripped of all royal titles and placed under house arrest while criminal charges were prepared. King Charles announced he would rule without a crowned queen, pending resolution of these serious matters. James Fletcher's legal situation became more complicated. Technically, he had committed treason by disrupting the coronation and violating royal protocol, but he had also exposed genuine crimes that threatened national security. Public opinion was firmly on his side, with polls showing 70% of Britons considered him a patriot rather than a traitor. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that Camilla had been planning to have James killed after the coronation. Phone records showed her arranging a convenient accident for the captain who knew too much. Suddenly, James's dramatic intervention looked less like treason and more like self-defense. The trial became the most watched legal proceeding in British history. James's lawyer argued that disrupting a corrupt coronation was not treason, but patriotic duty, The prosecution struggled to maintain their case as more evidence of royal corruption emerged daily. The turning point came when Sir David Stirling, a retired intelligence chief, testified that James had actually prevented a foreign intelligence operation from placing an asset on the British throne. The evidence showed that Camilla's corruption was part of a larger plan to weaken Britain from within. After 6 months of investigation, trials, and constitutional crisis, the final verdicts were announced. Camilla was sentenced to 15 years in prison for treason, corruption, and conspiracy. Several palace officials received lesser sentences for their roles in the schemes. James Fletcher was acquitted of all charges. The judge ruled that his actions, while technically illegal, were justified by the extraordinary circumstances and the genuine threat to national security that he had uncovered. The day of his acquittal, James walked out of the courthouse to find thousands of people cheering in the streets. Someone had organized a parade in his honor. Signs read, "Captain Courage," and "The Guard Who Guarded Britain." King Charles, politically damaged but still on the throne, made a televised address to the nation. He apologized for the corruption in his household and announced new transparency measures for royal finances. He also officially thanked James Fletcher for his service to the crown and country. James returned to his small London flat, no longer a royal guard, but now something more valuable, a symbol of ordinary people standing up to corruption. Book publishers and movie studios offered millions for his story. Foreign governments invited him to speak about fighting corruption within powerful institutions. But James chose a quieter path. He opened a small security consulting business, helping organizations protect themselves from internal corruption. His experience had taught him that the greatest threats often came from within, from people who were trusted with power and betrayed that trust. On the first anniversary of the failed coronation, James visited Westminster Abbey as a regular tourist. The building looked smaller than he remembered, less intimidating. The spot where he had stood to challenge royal power was marked with flowers left by supporters who remembered his courage. A young guard approached him, recognizing his face from newspaper photos. "Sir, I wanted to thank you. You showed us all what real service looks like." James shook the young man's hand. "Just remember your oath," he said. "Not to any person or title, but to the people you serve. That's what matters." As he walked away from the Abbey, James thought about the price of truth and the value of courage. He had lost his career, his pension, and his old life, but he had gained something more important, the knowledge that when it mattered most, he had chosen right over easy, truth over comfort, and country over career. The British monarchy survived, but it was forever changed. New laws required public disclosure of royal finances. Independent oversight committees monitored palace activities. The age of absolute royal privilege was over, replaced by accountability and transparency. James Fletcher had kept his oath after all. Not the oath to protect the crown, but the deeper oath to protect the people that crown was supposed to serve. And in saving his country from corruption, he had discovered that sometimes the most loyal thing a guardian can do is to guard against those he was meant to protect. Years later, history books would record the day a royal guard's conscience changed a nation. Children would learn about the captain who chose courage over comfort, truth over tradition. And Westminster Abbey would forever remember the moment when one man's honor proved stronger than centuries of royal power. The monarchy endured, but it would never again forget that its greatest enemy might not come from outside its walls but from within. And its greatest protection might come not from blind loyalty, but from those brave enough to question when loyalty becomes betrayal.